父さんと母さんに連れられてじいちゃんの弔問に来て以来だな。この家に来たのはその時一度きりだが、あまり変わっていない気がする。あれから10年以上経つのか。
Welcome to the world of Hollow Cocoon. Hollow Cocoon is a charming indie horror game released on December 6, 2023 by Nayuta Studio. Nayuta is an indie developer with just a handful of people working out of Japan, and their only other game is a walking simulator called Cineris Somnia, which has very positive reviews on Steam. Hollow Cocoon is set in 1980s Japan, and the effort the devs put in to create an immersive and nostalgic set piece becomes immediately obvious the second you step foot in the game. Yet, despite the beautiful countryside we're exposed to at the beginning, Hollow Cocoon has a deep, tragic, and mysterious backstory tied up in all the horror elements we're forced to endure. We take on the role of Minato Jinba, a college student who finds himself at his estranged grandmother's home after she was found collapsed in her garden. As we learn in the introductory cutscene, Minato's grandmother Kinu never attended his mother's funeral, and since then his family broke off all communication with her until now. Begrudgingly, Minato goes to visit her with his father in the medical clinic where she remains unconscious and they recommend moving her to a proper hospital soon. Our father tells us to head off to stay at her home for the day while he takes her to the hospital in the meantime, and that's where the game begins. The first time I played Hollow Cocoon was back during the Steam Next Fest, where hundreds of developers released demos for their games. When I decided to give it a try, I found myself really shocked at the sheer quality of the graphics and serious attention to detail from Nayuta Studio. They've done a great job crafting an extremely immersive environment that feels like it's a direct copy from a real village in Japan. I found myself spending the first hour of the game just walking around the village and taking in all the sights and sounds and admiring the depth of it all. The village scene is filled with high-resolution textures on all the various objects, posters, and signs scattered around the abandoned buildings. It's pretty rare to find any games that take the time, effort, and storage space to create high-resolution textures for more minuscule details of the environment. But I'm of the opinion that the more detailed your environment is up close, the more immersive the experience can be. Not every game needs to be a grandiose city or planet filled with content that only looks good at a distance or grand scale. Sometimes giving the time and attention to a smaller subset of areas can be the better choice, and I think it makes perfect sense for a game like Hollow Cocoon. Besides the various details in the posters and advertisements across the village, we also have the beautiful foliage and nature of the town swaying in the wind with the ambient sounds of crows in the background. Let's just take a second to take in and appreciate what the developers have done here. I don't know about you, but I just love that. Heading into the house, the interior is just as carefully detailed and designed as the village. Each room is fit with unique furniture and pictures, with clutter that makes the whole place feel like someone really lives there. Just look at the kitchen of this place. It's filled with so much character, and everything here feels like it was meticulously planned out to make the space feel like a truly lived-in room that a real person has been using daily. I think that there are many abilities an artist can hone and utilize at their disposal to make what could be considered great art. Some can take the abstract and elicit meaning and emotion from what is otherwise chaotic and disordered, while others can beautifully represent form that already exists, but in a new, fresh way that uncovers something hidden beneath the surface of the otherwise ordinary. In the case of Hollow Cocoon, I think Nayuta Studio has done the latter excellently. And this level of quality doesn't really diminish once we get into the horror parts of the game, but I think there's less of a chance to really take it in. Partially because it's very dark, but also because I was way more focused on avoiding the demon. But during the moments that I could, I found the game held up pretty well. Another big benefit to the game's attention to detail is that each room feels distinct and clear as to its purpose. For a game where you're meant to collect different items throughout the area to interact with pieces of the environment to solve puzzles in the dark while avoiding a monster, being able to easily distinguish one room from another avoids a common problem that I often run into with other games like this. I've played quite a few games where you have to backtrack through the same map multiple times or go to various different rooms to try and figure out where you're supposed to go to next. And so many of those games fall prey to the issue of the player becoming completely fucking lost and spending way too long just to try to find that one room with the statues that you finally have the item to complete the puzzle for. I think the reason so many games have this issue is either because they have levels where certain areas are not adequately distinct from each other, or because they don't follow any sort of understandable logic that can help you remember where a room most likely is. And I think having a good in-game map helps with this a lot, but there are still plenty of times where even a map doesn't help make sense of the level design. All that is to say, I think Hollow Cocoon does a good job at both providing rooms that have enough distinct features in them due to its attention to detail, as well as laying out the areas you explore with a straightforward and realistic layout that's easy to navigate. I also think having well-designed areas helps add to the immersiveness and therefore the tension of the gameplay that works great for a horror game. Nayuta Studio's level design makes the areas you explore feel very real and feel like they fit within an understandable real-world logic. There's no weird death traps or bizarre light puzzles or any of the other weird shit you might find in a game like Resident Evil. You're walking through a place that has real rooms with real purposes connected in ways that are clear and understandable. And all of that pulls you into a world where you can feel all the emotions of the experience personally, rather than detaching you from the moment and having the experience feel video gamey. And at the same time, you don't feel like you're being cheated by the game artificially adding in scary situations and locations that don't make sense just to be scary. The demon really does explore the areas freely, and when you encounter it, there's an honest weight to that interaction. For example, when you peek down a long hallway in the dark, waiting to see if the demon will show up, and the second you work up the courage to finally turn the corner, and the demon happens to step out of one of the rooms just as you're going, you really experience a sense of dread that feels properly earned by the game in that moment. Now, all of that said, there are definitely moments in Hollow Cocoon that unfortunately do take what I would consider the cheap approach by putting in clearly scripted events as well as some jump scares. But overall, there are only a few of these instances, and the entire rest of the time is more of an organic and earned experience. In terms of sound design, Hollow Cocoon also does a pretty good job at fitting the overall atmosphere and tying in very well to the strengths of the visual style and themes of the game. First off, as we've seen already, during moments of just sitting in the breeze with the grass and trees blowing and crows cawing in the background really ties the nostalgic and calming atmosphere of the earlier parts of the game together. And later, when we're exploring the house, we can still hear the wind blowing the trees and bushes outside, continuing that very grounding and immersive ambience. I also think all the sound effects when we pick up items, interact with objects in drawers, and so on are all on point, and the more video gamey sound effects of things like tutorial prompts and saving the game all feel nice and satisfying. In particular, when you approach a save station, it glows bright and emits a nice sound, which prompts a real sense of relief in you after wandering the dark halls just trying to stay alive. And the sound of the demon itself has a pretty strong impact at certain moments as it's wandering around. As for music, it's used very sparingly and in a way that emphasizes key moments in your playthrough. Some notable examples are when we first approach Kinu's home, or when we're approaching the demon, creepy music starts to play to help build the tension. And during emotional story moments, especially as we uncover more of the mystery of the game. Other than these explicit uses of more dramatic music, in the horror segments we tend to have a low droning sound playing to help build the tension that's only broken up by the sounds of our own actions. I think this choice to allow silence to speak for itself when it makes sense really works well to instill a feeling of solitariness, which works great for horror games like this one. Another of Hollow Cocoon's strengths is its voice acting. Minato's voice actor in particular does a fantastic job being properly expressive for the situations he's in. I think the choice to have the main character remark on the situation and have a great voice actor for it is a really nice choice that adds a lot of character to the game and adds a lot of weight to the story and the plight of our main character. It moves him from being a generic stand-in concept of a person to becoming a real believable person of his own that fits into the story directly. All in all, I have nothing but high praise for the sound design of Hollow Cocoon, which makes a lot of sense considering the quality of their visual design as well. As for gameplay and mechanics, Hollow Cocoon is a horror game where your main objective is to traverse through an area solving puzzles without being caught by the demon. You do this by sneaking around by crouching or walking slowly, turning off your flashlight, and hiding in closets and boxes to avoid being detected. If you're caught, your only real option is to run away from the demon long enough to where you get enough distance that you can hide, or that she simply stops following you. I'm not sure if she gives up as easily at higher difficulties, but she seems to slow down or just lose track of you altogether on normal difficulty. While running, you use up stamina, which also changes based on difficulty. Once you use up all of your stamina, you can't run for a bit until it recharges. But there actually is one more option available to you to protect yourself from the demon that I find pretty interesting. If the demon approaches one of the save points, it'll repel her a limited number of times depending on the difficulty. I think this is a nice additional option if you're really having a hard time getting away from the demon and just want it to, fuck off. You can also lean left and right around corners, which I don't usually use much in games, but I found it quite useful in my time playing Hollow Cocoon. Just be aware, if you do, your flashlight will shine down the hallway too, which can alert the demon. Oh, and if you are running from the demon, you can press the middle mouse button to look behind you, but I never really saw a point in using it. That's pretty much it for the controls. You can also interact with stuff and open your menus as well, which reveals all the relevant menus you'll need. Your inventory screen shows all the items you have as well as your current health state. Your file screen shows all the files you've found so far so you can reference them whenever you need. And the map screen shows the current area's map if you've found it. Overall, Hollow Cocoon is a very straightforward game. As I said before, your goal is usually just to solve puzzles while avoiding the demon. Your main goal is usually spoken aloud by Minato, so try to keep what that main goal is in mind, because it isn't written down anywhere. The game is quite short though, so I don't think anyone should really have a hard time keeping up with what's going on. The demon itself wanders around the level in different areas, but is scripted to appear at certain points in the game's progression. So be aware, you can't completely avoid her entirely. The difficulties do change to the degree to this effect though. As she wanders around, it's important to try and listen out for the auditory clues the game gives you that she's close by. A scary, droning musical sound will start to play whenever you see or get close to her. This definitely helps a lot since you'll often be wandering around in the dark and have no clue where the hell she is at the moment to know which areas are safe to explore and not. But keep in mind, when she's wandering around, it's best to not try and juke her at all. She has surprisingly strong eyesight even on normal difficulty, and things like foliage and darkness don't really hide you at all in some cases, as you can see here. It's always best to just try and peek to see where she's going and just stay away from there until she moves on. And when you want to hide, stay behind a physical barrier like a closet wall or door, but just be aware she can open doors whenever she wants. If she does see you, she seems to notice you in two stages. Either she will just slightly notice you and move over to investigate, which you can usually notice by the sort of sound she makes, or if she fully notices you, she'll immediately start chasing you and the music will take off. The gameplay is pretty standard horror game stuff, so none of this should be much of a surprise to anyone who has seen or played any first-person horror game like it before. Now, let's talk about the story. Hollow Cocoon is a pretty short game overall, and I think that's to the benefit of the game's story, which I'll explain with what I think is a very apt comparison. Hollow Cocoon reminds me a lot of Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. Now, just to preface, I haven't finished Fatal Frame 2 yet, but I think I can still make my point despite that. I think the two games are quite similar in the sense that you explore very old Japanese buildings finding diaries to uncover the story and mystery behind the game. And of course, they're both horror games, though they don't necessarily have the same type of gameplay. Putting that aside though, the way in which information is presented to you in Fatal Frame 2 is a lot more drawn out and esoteric than in Hollow Cocoon. For Fatal Frame, the diaries are filled with smaller bits of cryptic information that you have to slowly piece together to uncover the grander mystery behind the story over the course of the whole game. But for Hollow Cocoon, the game simply isn't long enough to draw out the story that way. All the information you come across is explicit and clear, and each bit of it reveals relevant detail to the overall story, rather than being full of fluff and flourish. So for those looking for a drawn-out, deep, and complicated horror mystery, Hollow Cocoon isn't that kind of experience. But that doesn't mean the story's bad by any means. Personally, I'm very impatient, and I hate reading tons and tons of text logs and information in games. So for me, Hollow Cocoon does a great job at respecting my time by giving me exactly the information I need. So let's explore the story and see what Hollow Cocoon is all about. If you end up wanting to try this game for yourself, I've marked the point in the video where I get into spoiler territory. Like I mentioned before, you are Minato Jinba, and your grandmother Kinu was found collapsed in her garden by a delivery man passing by. You and your father Eiji go to visit your grandmother in the clinic where they inform you that she's still unconscious and they don't have the proper medical equipment to test her, so they recommend you take her to a hospital to be checked. Your father agrees and tells you to head to her home to rest while he takes her to the hospital before picking you up later that night. So we take the bus to Ichinose village where our grandmother lives and explore for a bit before heading up to her home. We find some posters, as well as a letter in our grandmother's mailbox regarding plans for the village to be turned into a dam site, which explains why everyone has left, but doesn't really explain why our grandmother hasn't. Heading into the home, we learn some more information, mostly from Minato himself, with little comments as we interact with different objects throughout the house. Apparently, his grandfather, Kinu's husband Saichi, died by falling down the well behind the house some time back. When this happened, she never told anyone about the incident, and once Minato's mother Yui found out, she committed suicide shortly after. So for whatever reason, our grandmother Kinu never seems to leave her home, and when these different major events in the family's life happen, she seems to stay very distant and indifferent, which explains a lot of Minato's disdain for her. We also find a letter from Minato's mother to his grandfather where she makes mention of her situation and how drinking water helps alleviate it, which Minato doesn't really seem to understand. If you go into the kitchen and drink from the sink, you'll also notice that Minato remarks at being very thirsty without knowing why. Anyway, with not much left to do, we go to bed for the night and have some pretty weird dreams that we will take a look at.
Kinu-o-ba-a-chan? それは何?
これはお蚕様だよ。お蚕様はね、それは大事に大事に育てるの。暖かい部屋で お腹いっぱい桑の葉を食べさせてあげるのよ。そうしてきれいな繭を作ったら茹でて殺して糸を取るの。かわいそうだと思うのかい。たとえ繭を出られてももう口はないし飛ぶこともできない。卵を産んで死んでしまうの。人がそういう虫にしてしまったのよ。
母さん。母さん、行くな。
After we awaken, we hear a banging sound near the front door. So when we go to investigate, we find a severed chicken head outside. Yum. Clearly freaked out, we head back in and the phone immediately rings. Our father is called and tells us he'll be stuck at the hospital with Kinu for a while and has to speak to the police due to what appears to be strangulation marks around her neck, so they suspect she may have been attacked. After the call, Minato mentions being thirsty once again, so we head to the kitchen. Well, of course, when you see a humanoid figure walking around outside your house, the best choice is to go out and investigate without any protection whatsoever. Obviously. So let's see how Minato's brilliant plan goes. Well, at least he had the good sense to run his ass back inside and make a good plan. And this is where the horror part of the game finally begins. We start by going to pick up the flashlight we saw sitting on a chair earlier and heading to the phone to call the police. And just as we're getting in touch with them, the demon grabs our asses and throws us across the room. Hey man, not cool. Anyway, after fumbling around for a while to escape the demon, we go out back behind the chicken coop to pick up the poker, use it to grab a key from the bathtub drain, and use the key to open a dresser drawer where we can get the padlock code for the secret locked door at the back of our grandmother's home. As we're heading in, we block off the door while the demon chases us. After she finally gives up, we have a few minutes to search around the room and read some letters lying around. One tells us that our grandmother has a brain tumor and that she needs immediate treatment, which she has apparently been avoiding. And another is a response to Minato's mother Yui from his grandfather Saiichi, in which he once again comments on Yui's secret that she's hiding from her husband and child, as well as Kinu's odd behaviors over the years, stating that she has her reasons for being absent and never leaves her home for anyone. So far, we just have more questions than answers, but let's continue on for now. The only other way to go is a door in the room leading outside to an area behind the house that is otherwise inaccessible. Up the hill a bit is a two-story shed that we use our grandmother's weird key that we've had since the beginning of the game to open. Inside, we find another letter from Minato's father Eiji to Kinu describing that when Minato reached around the age of 13, he started having more issues with intense thirst that Yui had briefly mentioned was a condition she also had that she inherited from her father. But since Yui and Saichi have both passed away, he's writing this letter to try and reach out to Kinu for any kind of help or explanation. So whatever this secret illness is about needing to drink water is apparently something Yui passed down to Minato, and the only one left alive who has any idea about it is Kinu. Interesting. Heading upstairs in the storage shed, we find a little puzzle that utilizes a short storybook. In the story, we hear the tale of Princess Mayu. The story is about Princess Mayu's envious sister who tries to lead her out far away and abandon her. Yet each time she tries, the princess returns unscathed. After 3 different attempts, the 4th attempt she tries to bury her in a garden. But when the princess finally doesn't return, the sister returns to the hole to peer inside and sees a hollow cocoon filled with silkworms. It may not be exactly obvious what this story means or why it's relevant, but it'll become more clear as we continue along. After we solve the puzzle, a secret compartment opens up downstairs in the shed that leads to deep, dark tunnels running underground. Down here, we find a wooden cage with a letter written from one of the prisoners to Lord Kyubei, the patriarch of the Miyama family and our grandmother Kinu's father, begging him not to feed him to the demon. Continuing past the cage leads us to a secret back entrance into the old abandoned Miyama family mansion. In one of the first rooms, we find a book that tells us some details about the silkworm business of the family, and that legend has it that the silkworms originated from the body of Princess Mayu, who we just read about a bit ago. As we continue exploring through the mansion, solving puzzles to find our way out while avoiding the demon wandering around, we find quite a number of diaries that give us a great bit of detail about Minato's family's past. Basically, when his grandfather Saichi was young, he met Kinu as a young girl along with her sister Ayano. We learn that Saichi was actually in love with Kinu's older sister, Ayano, and describes her beauty and grace in his diaries. But as it turns out, Kinu loved Saichi and wanted his attention while Ayano wanted nothing to do with Saichi and would often avoid him. So Kinu, learning about Saichi's unrequited love, became very jealous and bitter towards Ayano, despite Ayano still being loving and kind with her. For a while, the two sisters continued to get along, and even despite her bitter envy, Kinu was still drawn to love and care for her sister. And it seems that Ayano's presence tends to draw people in and make them love her, which in some ways seems to make Kinu's envy even stronger with her own self-conflicted feelings. Eventually, fed up with her hiding her resentment towards her sister, Kinu explodes and vents to her sister about Saichi and runs away, leaving her abandoned up in the mountains where they were walking together. This is the same story we saw with the tale of Princess Mayu. And like in that story, around a month passes and finally Ayano returns to everyone's surprise and relief. Kinu, feeling deep sadness over leaving her sister, is relieved she returns, but notices that she appears completely pristine and looks like she hasn't spent a single day in the nature of the mountains. In her diary, Kinu pledges to never abandon her sister like that again and fall to her envious feelings. After Ayano's return, Saichi immediately goes to Lord Kyubei and asks to see her, and he responds that she has been feeling unwell and if Saichi wants to see her again, he must marry Kinu and become part of the family. Saichi accepts immediately and is allowed to see Ayano. But, as we learn, Ayano was kept in a dark dungeon beneath the family mansion where she had begun to change into a strange monster that barely resembled the Ayano he had come to know and love. Later on in the game, we find a doctor's journal that explains what details we have of Ayano's strange transformation. The doctor was a good friend of Lord Kyubei who called him in to check on his daughter who had returned after being stranded in the mountains for a month. To his surprise, like everyone, she was completely unscathed and not even dirty. But at the same time, she was completely catatonic, staring blankly forward and unresponsive. The doctor notes after a month, nothing has changed and Ayano still sits alone in her room staring blankly into space. The only difference in her behavior he notices is when her sister Kinu is nearby, where she leans on her and gives a faint smile. Another entry notes, many months later, the doctor thinks it would be a good idea for Ayano to get some sunlight, and as he opens the door to her room to let it in, she lets out a blood-curdling scream of pain and her skin immediately burns in the sun. Another many months later, the doctor notes she has begun to change, losing lots of weight from not eating, yet growing taller and taller. And he even notes that behind her sunken eyes, he gets the feeling of a prey being watched by a predator. After some more time passes, we find a troubling entry from the doctor about his greatest fears coming to pass. Apparently, Lord Kyubei has to lock Ayano away as she apparently attacked one of the family servants and ate her. Given this event, Lord Kyubei asks the doctor to forge a death certificate for Ayano using the servant's body to hide her existence. Many years later, the doctor writes a new entry detailing the final details of Ayano's transformation, which describes the demon as we now know it. A tall, thin, pallid creature with no nose and partial insect eyes with silkworm markings formed on her back. Apparently, she's fed a supply of cows, chickens, and sometimes even human beings. A few years later, another entry notes that Kinu came to the doctor about Ayano having strange stomach cramps, which he observed to be a pregnancy that he describes as something she's been holding for 6 years. 2 years later, we have the final journal entry from the doctor. Lord Kyubei has since disappeared, and it's finally time to help deliver the baby from Ayano. Unable to give birth properly, he plans to perform a C-section and remove what he fears will not be a human child from her body. And that's the last we hear from the doctor's journals. Meanwhile, we also find some disturbing diaries from our grandfather Saiichi. In one, he found our mother Yui as a young girl crying, covered in blood over the corpse of a canary he had gifted her for her 13th birthday. Asking her what had happened, she explained that she was so incredibly thirsty that she felt the urge to drink the canary's blood, much to her and Saiichi's dismay. Wanting to protect his child from the horrible reality of her existence, he lied and explained that she inherited her bloodlust from him and pledged that they would drink the blood of animals together so she didn't have to be alone. So, as it turns out, Minato's mother Yui was the child that the demon Ayano gave birth to, which explains her strange so-called thirsty desires. Which also means that we too have the blood of a demon within us. This explains the strange thirstiness that we've inherited from her, as well as Minato's mentions of headaches while being around the save points that are known to repel demons. With this wild revelation in mind, there are still some questions about Saiichi and Yui's death that still bear some explanation. As it turns out, Lord Kyubei had spent some time researching a cure to Ayano's strange affliction that he actually managed to find some details about. Apparently, he found an ancient document that describes the princess possession, which can be cured if they acquire a special cocoon. Saiichi also writes that he had discovered the same journal from Lord Kyubei, and still in love with Ayano, wished to try and find the mentioned cocoon to cure Ayano from her affliction. So he took this information to the only person left alive who knows about Ayano, his wife Kinu, who we learn from her journals has been completely possessed by a psychotic obsession for her sister. Kinu describes her love for her sister and her beauty even some 30 years after her horrific transformation, despite having to feed her live animals and humans. And when she learns about Saiichi's plan to try and heal Ayano from her affliction, she tricks Saiichi to the well behind the house where she pushes him in, finally explaining the nature of our grandfather's death. As for Minato's mother Yui, Kinu writes that she came to her after Saiichi's death to ask her about it. Seeing Yui's resemblance to the old way Ayano used to look when she was younger, told her that she was born purely from Ayano's monstrous body and revealed the horrifying truth to her. Now knowing the truth, Yui threw herself in front of a train and took her own life. Finally comes the last bit of the backstory of Hollow Cocoon that ties everything together with the absolute tragic writings of Ayano herself. November 21st, 1929. Kinu looked so sad and resentful. She said, "Ayano, you are like a butterfly." This left me speechless. All I could do was hold back my tears. It pains me to see Kinu suffer because of me. All I want is for Kinu to be happy. But I am not a butterfly. I'm more like a silkworm. I was given mulberry leaves in a warm silkworm room. I never needed to leave and always had someone to care for me. My body dissolves within the cocoon and I dream without ever being able to fly. I merely cling to life. But so long as Kinu is by my side, I am content. Considering Kinu's feelings, maybe it's better I leave this silkworm room. If I disappeared, Kinu could be with Saiichi. Yet, I can't bring myself to leave. My marriage to Saiichi is approaching, and the more I realize how little time we have left, the more I cherish my time with Kinu. I know what happens to silkworms once they leave the silkworm room. That is what I'm afraid of. If it were up to me, I would remain by her side forever. And to really put the final nail in the coffin, Kinu abandoned me. Kinu was crying. Kinu hates me and loves Saiichi. I don't want Kinu to cry. I want death. I met her. She is too pure. I cry and she hugs me. She shoots threads and we form cocoon together. In the cocoon, we dissolve and merge together as one. I am being lost. I stop being me. I forget many things. Her memories replace mine. She keep eating me. I so thirsty. Give me water. Blood red water. Who old man outside standing there? Ayano, he cries. Who is Ayano? I think it me? Old man enters cell. He stroked my head and cry. Kinu laughed and said, Bon appetit. Kinu give me tasty water. She call me with gentle voice. I happy. Kinu is precious. Save me, save me. I'm scared. I'm scared. I forget Kinu. She almost ate all of me. Who am I? Where do I begin? Please no eat memories of Kinu. Before I forget Kinu, kill me. Yeah, that's the best performance I can give you, sorry. Anyway, at this point there's nothing left but to face the tragic demon Ayano, but just before that we have one final journal from Kinu finally giving us an insight into what initially led us to her home in the first place. Ayano was constantly vomiting blood. She has since stopped moving. She drank the blood I had prepared for her, knowing I had poisoned it. I had no other choice. I was sick and dying. Soon I would be sleeping with the fishes. My frail arms were withered like a dead tree branch. This is the only thing I could do. Once I'm gone, who will care for my sister? Who will bathe her, trim her nails, and brush her hair every day? How will society treat her? They'll look at her with fear and morbid curiosity and call her a crazy monster. She will be treated as subhuman. I cannot subject my sister to this fate. My greatest fear was forgetting my sister. My sickness grows and my memories are fading. Each night, I lay down with an unbearable headache. The anxiety crushes my soul, the nagging question of if I will even remember her the next morning. I killed everyone, my father, Saichi, Yui, and even my sister. I was left alone with a noose. I am dying in pain. I apologize. I know how my sister really felt, but I treated her poorly out of envy, despite knowing how vile it was. I admired everything about her. This is why I despised her. My sister was the only one who truly understood me, despite knowing how cruel and merciless I could be. Yet still, Ayano cared for me more than anyone else. When the sun set, she would light up the house for me. She did so to prevent me from falling. My eyes and legs are old and weak. She would always gently massage my wrinkled, cold hands. Her mind is almost completely void of memories, yet she never forgot about me. That is enough. We found happiness in our own way. We knew all things come to an end. Forgive me, as this was the only way to save my sister. I do not know what happened to her on that day. I do not know who the she writes about is. But I, like her, also wish to dissolve in a cocoon and become one with my sister. And with that, we finally know the full story behind Hollow Cocoon. Once we fight and defeat the demon Ayano, we get this scene. We have two choices here, either kill or spare our true grandmother, Ayano. If you choose to kill her as I did, you get this ending for the game.
絹さん、あなたと話をしたかった。あなたを許すことはできないけれど、それでも話をしたかったよ。綾乃さんのことは誰にも、父さんにすら話してない。あなたに毒を飲まされても死ねなかった綾乃さんは、あなたを縄から下ろして助けようとしたんだ。絹さんを抱いて玄関先まで運んだんだろう。綾乃さんは最後まで絹さんを呼んでいたよ。俺は綾乃さんを殺してしまった。そう思っていたのに。 綾乃さんは消えていたんだ。彼女の亡骸をあのままにできなくて、埋葬しようと戻った時にはもう綾乃さんの姿はどこにもなかった。そこにあったのは穴の開いた巨大な繭と地面を這う真っ白な無数の蚕だけだった。もしかすると綾乃さんは今もあなたを探しているのかもしれない。ここはじき湖の底に沈む。もうここには来ないよ。さようなら。あれはたとえこの渇きに生涯苛まれることになっても、俺の中にどんな血が混じっていても、それでも俺は人として生きるよ、綾乃ばあちゃん。
To me, this was the most satisfying and appropriate end, so I'm glad I made that final choice. But there are still more endings than just this. There are 2 more bonus endings, but we also still have the spare Ayano ending, so let's take a look at that one first.
綾乃ばあちゃん。父さん、大学はもう決めたことだ。今さらとやかく言わないでくれないか。
湊、お前は一体どうしてしまったんだ。絹さんの家を継ぐと突然言い出して、彼女のようにずっとその家にこもるつもりなのか。
そうだよ。俺はここにいるべきなんだ。ここにいたいんだよ。ダム建設の話もどうやら立ち消えになりそうだし。
頼む、おかしなことを言わんでくれ。帰ってきてくれ。大学のことはもういい。お前と会って話をしたいんだ。
父さんにはわからないよ。父さんは人だから。俺のことは忘れて二度と電話をよこさないでくれ。
湊。
ああ、もうこんな時間か。早く食事の支度をしないと。ごめん、遅くなって腹減っただろ。夕食を持ってきたよ。温かいうちに食べて。また泣いているの？絹さんはもう死んでしまったんだよ。大丈夫、何の心配もいらないさ。これからは俺がばあちゃんとずっと一緒にいるんだから。
Overall, I quite like the story of Hollow Cocoon. I don't think it's necessarily anything revolutionary, and it is pretty short overall, but not every game needs to be a grand tale with 10 tons of lore behind it. For the length of the game, which is around 4 hours or so, the amount of story detail and the impact of realizations given by the diaries and letters scattered around the game world I think does a great job. The story of the Miyama family and the steady bits of crucial information you're given over the course of the game feel like just the right amount of pacing in my opinion. I felt like there were a handful of interlinked questions that were always presented well to me, and as each question was steadily given more information, it all culminated with all the pieces suddenly falling into place at the very end of the game in a satisfying way. The only area of improvement that I think the game could benefit from is an exploration of the reasons why Ayano transforms into the strange monster she becomes. And in one of the bonus endings we'll see later, a little more of this is made clear, but I think there's something lacking in this area. I think the horror aspects of the game could be enriched further if a bit more time is spent on the mythical aspects of how all this happened. We get the story of Princess Mayu, which seems to be the she Ayano's scribblings referenced as she was transforming. And one of the bonus endings confirms that as well. And there's also the nature of the silkworms and cocoon that are all part of the nature of the horror, but I think there's a missed opportunity here to explore that a bit more. Either we could have gotten a more concrete explanation, or we could have had more time spent on developing a greater mythos behind the silkworms, cocoon, and Princess Mayu. And we did get some of that at certain points, such as the storybook tale of Princess Mayu, the bonus ending, and the first dream sequence where we see Kinu talking about the silkworms, but that's really the extent of it. Speaking of the bonus ending that I keep alluding to, let's actually get into that so you can see what I mean. So, to unlock the bonus endings, you have to have first beaten the game once to unlock the bonus shop, then spend your points there to unlock the secret items to carry into your next playthrough. Here's how that works. Throughout the game, you'll come across these flipper games that you can insert a 10 yen coin into to try and get it into the goal. You find a limited amount of 10 yen coins around the game map on shelves and in drawers and such. The purpose of doing these little games is if you beat them, you get winning tickets. Each winning ticket color responds to a certain amount of points, and the points get immediately added to your overall total when you acquire them. White tickets are worth 1 point, yellow tickets are worth 5 points, and red tickets are worth 20 points. And your overall total is tracked in the shop that only unlocks once you beat the game once. These flipper games can be pretty annoying, but you could usually cheese these with save points, so they're not really a big deal. You only need 20 points to unlock both bonus endings. The rest of the shop is purely funny cosmetic stuff. So, we go ahead and purchase the 2 bonus items we need for the bonus endings. We'll start with the lore-relevant Princess Mayu ending, which uses the butterfly key to unlock one of the rooms in the mansion. Let's take a look. Sitting on the shrine before us is the second hidden journal of Lord Kyubei and the cocoon he originally mentioned in his first diary. Lord Kyubei describes the cocoon as a secret medicine that severs the cycle of reincarnation for those who ingest it, rendering their soul like a hollow cocoon. This is a great example of that sort of mystical background lore that I think this game could use more of to add to the weight and horror aspects of the story. But unfortunately, this is all we get. So now that we have the cocoon needed for the bonus Mayu Hime ending for the game, let's see what that looks like.
やっと眉から出てきてくれたんですね。長かった。この日が来ることをどれだけ待ちわびたか。母さんにそっくりだ。
Honestly, I find this ending really disappointing. I think there was a really good opportunity for Nayuta Studio to explore a deeper, more interesting, true ending for the game, but instead we get this sort of campy ending that doesn't really explain anything. It's a real shame. But now that we have the disappointing bonus content out of the way, let's talk about the fun parts. So we have the second bonus ending, but I'll save that for last because it's a whole wild experience. First, let's start with the extra Mary hidden content. When you do a new playthrough after beating the game once, a weird doll appears at the bus stop right when you start the game in the village. This is the Mary doll. There's a TV in Grandma Kinu's house, and you can flip through the channels to watch different little shows. One of these shows tells a cheesy horror story about a girl who gets a new doll for her birthday and throws away her old doll named Mary. Later that night, she gets a phone call from Mary telling her that she's by the dumpster where she was left. The girl hangs up but gets another call from Mary saying she's at the tobacco shop. Each time Mary calls, she gets closer to the girl's house until the girl ultimately disappears. Ooh, scary. Anyway, this version of Mary you can't interact with, so let's just head up to the house. If you call the number 9679 on the phone, you'll get these same phone calls from Mary. This number is normally found on a piece of paper on one of the abandoned buildings in the village. Between each phone call, you have to wait a few minutes before she'll call again, but each time she'll move closer to your location. You can also go out to the village between each call and actually see that she's changed locations each time, which is a nice little touch. Anyway, after you cycle through all the phone calls, you get this little scene.
誰もいない。やっぱりいたずらだったか。もういい加減にしろよ。
私のリーさん、今あなたの後ろにいるの。
Pretty neat. I'm always a big fan of little Easter eggs, so I figured I'd show you some of them. Speaking of eggs, here's another. First of all, in the chicken coop you find an egg. If you eat the egg, it increases your defense overall, which I chose to do on my first playthrough. But apparently, if you keep the egg in your inventory through the entire game, around the time you reach halfway through the mansion area, the egg will hatch into an adorable chick that will follow you around. I mean, just look at him. He's fucking adorable and precious. Wait, what's that on his head? Don't worry about it. Leave me and my son alone. Anyway, that's not all for the chickens either. What if you were a sick bastard and wanted to abuse some chickens for fun? Zelda has taught us a lot about this, so let's see what happens if you run into the chickens over and over again. You absolute monster. How could you do this? Though, I wonder what happens if you kill all of them. This is the most fantastic little Easter egg. You can really tell the developers don't really take themselves too seriously and have a good sense of humor. As a matter of fact, this is far from the most insane Easter egg we have. Let's finally talk about the last bonus ending. So, the final ending uses the Tinfoil Hat bonus item from the shop. Now, what in the world could a tinfoil hat be useful for? Well, apparently Minato has a secret fascination with, you guessed it, UFOs. That's right, if you wear the tinfoil hat through your playthrough, Minato would become a UFO-obsessed weirdo. The extent of this is mostly just posters show up throughout the levels that he can interact with, but they all give the same interaction I just showed.
何度でも言うぞ。俺は信じてる。
Other than that, though, there's also some issues of the Occult Monthly magazine mentioned in one of the TV shows that discusses UFOs. It mostly just contains some goofy scoop about some old picture scrolls showing a woman in a mulberry boat, likely referencing the Princess Mayu story, and attributing the boat to being a UFO and the woman possibly being an alien. Overall, it's just a goofy made-up article, but let's see what else the Tinfoil Hat adds to your playthrough.
この昔話を
Yep, you saw that right. But this is far from the only close encounter we have. Here's some more that we see throughout the whole playthrough. With all these UFO sightings, you might even think it's possible that a UFO could actually show up and maybe even... No, that couldn't possibly happen, right?
Masaka, これは我がオカルト研究会の憧れミステリーサークルなのかすごいぞこの目で本物のミステリーサークルが見られるなんてん UFO?
Well, you know what? The Mayuhime ending was a bit disappointing, but I absolutely forgive it. I can see where all the real effort on backstory and lore was spent, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And with that, that's it for Hollow Cocoon. We've basically seen everything this game has to offer from start to finish, and even the bonus content. The only thing I didn't do in this game was play through the game on Nightmare difficulty, which unlocks after beating the game once. Sometimes running from the Demon Ayano is hard enough, so I'll pass on playing the max difficulty version. All in all, Hollow Cocoon is a great little indie game from Nayuta Studio, and I'm pretty happy for giving it a chance. It wasn't really something on my radar as far as making videos for this channel goes, but I wanted something short and sweet to play through, and this is something I wanted to play through for myself anyway, so why not? Like I mentioned before, I think the developers' focus on making a very well polished, small game really worked in their favor. Almost every aspect of the game feels like a great attention to detail and care went into the game's development, from the art, music, level design, voice acting, and story. The only real areas of improvement that I think the game could benefit from are going deeper into the mythical lore behind the silkworms and Ayano's strange transformation. I think this is an area where a game like Fatal Frame benefits with the time it spends developing out its flavor text to support the greater lore that feeds into the horror themes of the game. Still, despite that, I think Hollow Cocoon is a great game to give a try, and I hope Nayuta Studio continues exploring making more titles, even if they're not horror related, because they clearly have a talent for creating games that really immerse you. And I really look forward to seeing what more they can do in the future. Thanks for watching, and if you're interested in supporting me, please subscribe and feel free to do all the typical things that people ask you, like, comment, share, yada yada. But you can also check out my Patreon that I now have set up if you're interested in supporting me financially. It'll really help me make way more videos and offer more direct interaction with you and help determine what other content you might like to see. Anyway, thanks again, and I hope you look forward to the next video.